Okay, there we go. You can feel free to give the intros and welcoming, Nancy, while the participants filter in.
Okay, wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We greatly appreciate your support and interest in participating in this lecture series. My name is Nancy Simpson. I am Board Secretary at Gateway Centre of Excellence in Rural Health. Gateway is located in Goderich, Ontario, and to our knowledge is the only rural health research centre in Canada governed by community-based volunteers. Partnered with several academic centres and healthcare facilities, our mission is to improve the health and quality of rural residents through research, education, and communication. 2 years ago, Gateway launched this virtual lecture series with social isolation being top of mind as COVID-19 restrictions continued to heighten. There was no better time to launch this initiative. Through this lecture series, we hope to promote a culture of rural health knowledge and innovation while virtually connecting individuals and communities to help reduce social isolation. Today's speaker is Dr. Scott Brown. Scott is a research associate for our organization. He is a recent PhD graduate at the University of Guelph. So on behalf of all of us here today, congratulations, Scott. Scott has a passion for rural geography, capacity development, organizational studies, and process philosophy. Today, he'll talk about the idea of placemaking and how Gateway, Centre of Excellence in Rural Health, is an organization that engages in the kind of placemaking. With Scott today are panelists and key supporters of Gateway. Peter Smith of the Canadian Centre for Rural Creativity, Paul Nichol, General Manager of Community Futures Huron, and Jay McFarlan, Gateway Chair of Rural Nutrition and Exercise. Thank you so much, Scott, panelists, for your time and your insight today. I'll pass it back to you now, Scott, to begin your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you to the panelists as well. Thank you to Jay, Peter, and Paul for being here. I hope you enjoy the talk as well and that we can continue the discussion after my little talk. So let's get started here. I guess I'll just continue by introducing myself a bit further. So I'll start off by saying that I am from outside of healthcare. And so you might be thinking, what does this presentation have to do with what Gateway is doing? If you've looked at the previous topics for the lecture series, most of the topics are more explicitly surrounding, let's say, a clinical or a medical focus. That's not always the case, but that's usually the case. And so how does this presentation fit in with what Gateway is doing and Gateway's mission, et cetera? And it's really because, as Nancy said, I'm interested in organizational development and geography. And so I'm really interested in Gateway itself, Gateway, the organization. Another way that you could say this fits in with what Gateway is doing is, I guess you could say I'm interested in healthy organizations, so organizational health, or in this case, talking about organizational endurance. So that would be a quick way of sort of relating what I'd like to talk to you about today with Gateway's overall mission. And so that's how I see myself fitting in with this lecture series. Okay, so again, as Nancy said, today I'd like to talk to you about placemaking. And so really that compound term, placemaking, I want to talk about those two different aspects, place and then the making part of it, the organizational aspect. So I want very quickly at the beginning of the talk to talk to you about this notion of place and draw a little bit from the geography literature. And then I want to draw very quickly from the process organizational literature, just to give you a little bit of a flavor of each of these areas of scholarship. And then I want to bring them together to show you talk to you about how I've been thinking about this idea of placemaking and how it's entangled with organizations. So that's really the brief part of the talk. And then for the majority of the talk, I want to talk to you about Gateway itself. So I want to use these ideas that I'm talking about at the beginning of the talk to really act as a springboard for us to have a conversation about Gateway itself and its organizational endurance and Gateway's contribution to this notion of rural placemaking. And then of course, we'll have the panel with Pete, Paul, and Jay. following the talk. Okay, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about the notion of place to begin with. This compound term placemaking, let's talk about that first part, the place part. We're really talking about geography, the geography scholarship, the rural geography literature. And so there's all kinds of discussions and debates within the geography literature and across rural studies about how to think about this notion of place, thinking about the categories that are important that we should consider, thinking about the different things that need to come into consideration when we're talking about how places emerge, or what does it mean when we're talking about places. And so there's this one model that I have come to know and to like, was produced by Keith Haffacree. And so Haffacree is really bringing in these different categories as a way to talk about this notion of place. And so there's all sorts of definitional debates within rural studies about what constitutes rural places. And so some folks will say that it's, rural is material. Others will say it's more related to ideas and concepts. Others will say it has more to do with subjective experience. And really Haffacree's model is really all about not getting rid of any of these categories, but saying, you know what, I think it's important that we consider all of these categories in terms of what is going into this notion of rural place. And so I like Haffacree's model, and there's a little representation of it on the right side of your screen. So Haffacree has three different categories for thinking about rural place. So the first is spatial practice. So for this category, we're really talking about real practices, real things that people are doing, sort of the to and fro of activity. And then the second category is called formal representations of the rural. So here we're really talking about ideas, concepts, discourses, disciplines. Ideas have a way of exerting themselves on a particular place. And so that's what that second category is. And then the third category has to do with everyday lives. So we hear often this notion of lived experience. So we're talking about real experiences, the meanings that people attach to particular events in particular places. So this is a good model for thinking about rural places. And so Haffacree would say that at any given time, what's going on in a particular rural place, we really have to consider these three categories. So these are three categories that geographers are very interested in. So in terms of exploring this notion of place, that's really all I wanted to talk to you about. That's all I wanted to show you for now. So I want you to keep these three categories in your head for the next little while. The first category is real practices. So existing practices, existing routines, already existing capacities among people. So real things that people are doing. Secondly, representations, so concepts and discourses, ideas and disciplines. And then third, the sort of subjective experiences of people. So goals, subjective aims, decisions, meanings that people are attaching to events, into places. So again, these are those three categories that geographers are very interested in terms of thinking about place. This is just one way to approach the notion of place. And there are some other sources that I've included at the end in my references list that you can check out if you're interested in. But for now, I just want you to keep those three categories in your head. So real practices, concepts and discourses, and subjective experience. Because I'm going to just switch gears here for a moment and talk about the process organizational literature. So really, process organizational literature, it's really about bringing process philosophy developed by Whitehead and other scholars and bringing it in contact with organization studies. So it's brought into organizational studies by scholars like Hearns, for example. But really, when we're talking about organizations as processes, it's really about moving from thinking about organizations as nouns, so as enduring things, and moving towards thinking about organizing as a verb. And so organizations are not stubborn or enduring things, even though in our experiences, we're often tempted to see it this way because we have ongoing relationships with organizations for long periods of time. We come to see them as sort of these enduring entities, stable and enduring, but really an organization is really just, from the process perspective, an organization is just these individual processes, individual events that an organization is able to string together across time. So again, from the process perspective, an organization is really nothing more than the events that they create. And so Ford and Harding, in their article, the title of their article is, "We went looking for an organization, but could only find the metaphysics of its presence." So again, we might think that we if an organization is working in a particular building, we might point at the building and say, well, there's the organization. But really, from the process organizational perspective, it's hard to get your hands on an organization because it really only is what it does and the events that it's able to create. Okay, so if organizations, they're not stable entities, but they do endure somehow. We see them endure across time. So how are they able to do that? And so as Tucker says, when events come to share characteristics, endurance becomes a possibility. So organizations, even though they themselves aren't really enduring, we see them as enduring because they're sort of doing an activity across time and they're connecting events to other events. So those are some of the main insights from the process organizational literature. From Huron, he says something similar. He says, an organizational system is held up by the connectivity that it is able to perform between events over and across time. So again, an organization is only really, it's a reflection of its own ability to author events and then draw from those events and connect them, to connect events through time, I guess, because the organization itself is not enduring, let's say. So another insight that I want to talk to you about from the process organizational literature is really about how organizations are able to connect events to other events. So drawing from Whitehead, drawing from Hearns, we can say that organizations, when they're doing something new or whatever they're doing, first, what they're doing is they're sort of apprehending the materials in their environment. So they're looking at existing materials that they can use in order to create new events. So they're apprehending these existing materials, and they're also drawing and thinking of ideas about how to pull all these ingredients together in order to create a new event. And then finally, they're making a decision. So just how are you going to bring all of these events together, all these materials together, inject new ideas into them and make something new. So, and then once an organization has produced a new event, that event might factor into future events. So there's this ongoing process that sort of launches itself forward. So that's another insight from the process organizational literature that I wanted to share with you. And then I also wanted to talk quickly just about this notion of repetition. So across time, organizations aren't enduring, but over time, it looks like they're doing the same thing across time. They have actions across time that look identical, but really the process perspective is asking us to consider that even though it looks like they're doing the same thing, there's always something new that's produced because new connections are possible where they weren't possible before. And so repetition is also related to this notion of reiteration. So like I said, organizations themselves, they don't endure. The events that they create, they aren't enduring either, but they might reappear. And so what this means is that for an organization, just by continuing to act, even if it means doing the same thing, this is creating new opportunities for new connections. So just broad strokes, those are about 3 or 4 ideas from the process organizational literature that I wanted to just bring to your attention today as I move forward with this talk. And so as I said, I'm interested in this notion of placemaking and the way that I've been thinking about placemaking. And really what I want to tell you today is that my approach to placemaking is really bringing these 2 perspectives together. So the original geographical perspective that I talked about at the beginning, the insights from geography, you'll remember those 3 categories, real practices, discourses and ideas and concepts, and subjective experience, those 3 categories that really are of interest to geographers, bringing these together with the insights from the process organizational literature. So I've been thinking about placemaking as an organizational activity. And so for me, placemaking organizations are actively bringing together these 3 categories that we talked about previously, bringing these 3 categories together in the creation of new events, new projects, new things that happen. And then they're also connecting these events across time. That's what makes them an enduring organization and an enduring organization that does placemaking. And so that's really sort of the model that I wanted to talk to you about today, bringing these concerns of geography and bringing these concerns of the organizational literature, bringing them together as a way to talk about this notion of placemaking. Okay, and so for the remainder of my talk, I want to bring these ideas and use them as a way to talk about Gateway the organization. So I want to talk about Gateway to organizational endurance and the way that Gateway contributes to this idea of rural placemaking. So before I get into deeper into the discussion, I'll just give a brief brief organizational summary, a brief organizational background for Gateway, the organization. A good way to describe Gateway would be to just refer to its name, Gateway. It's been very appropriately named. Another term that I've encountered, actually I heard Dr. Milne, who was a research chair for Gateway, he uses the word portal. So essentially, Gateway is a portal for rural health research. And so Gateway is trying to enact a portal into its target counties. It's 4 rural target counties for rural healthcare research, research capacity, healthcare capacity, really just trying to draw attention and resources into their rural focus area and build up the capacity of the region in terms of rural health capability. A good way to talk about Gateway as well is to refer to, well, I know that Gwen, the founder of Gateway, she's heavily involved with physician recruitment. So this idea of making rural places more attractive to physicians, part of that is making rural a contender for research excellence and healthcare excellence. So Gateway's activities are sort of parallel to this idea of physician recruitment, trying to build up that research capacity of the area. And so Gateway is focusing its attention and its resources into building that up across time. And so I see that as a kind of placemaking. So that's where I want to go next with this talk. And so again, these 3 categories that I talked about earlier: real practices from the environment that are already existing, that can be drawn into a new sort of experience, concepts and discourses, and subjective experiences. I want to talk about all of these categories in terms of Gateway and how they bring it all together. First, I'll just sort of clarify what the part of the organization that I'm interested in. So Gateway does all kinds of things. They're heavily involved in fundraising activities. They host all kinds of knowledge mobilization events, all kinds of other activities that aren't really captured on this slide. But what I do have on the slide are Gateway's research projects and their community programming and their services and tools that they create. So it's really these 2 aspects, their community programming and their research arm, their research projects, that I'm interested in. That's the section, I guess, or the stream of activity of the organization that I'll be talking about today. And so this is a good slide that shows the different programs and research projects that Gateway have had over the years. And I also just want to show that the slide can be a little bit misleading. For example, some of these projects have a longer time frame than is shown here. Really, I've just pasted the names of the projects around the timeline where when they were ongoing. But really, some of them, for example, the Farmer Mental Health Project, that was a 3-year project, so that should probably take up a bit more space on the timeline. Same thing too, for example, with the Lonely No More program down here at the bottom. Again, I've just got one little name there at the bottom, but a lot of these programs are iterative and they take place multiple times and they take on different forms across time. And so there's sort of an ongoing, this slide isn't good at capturing the longevity of some of the projects and the research projects and the programming. But in any case, it gives you a good idea of what Gateway is up to. And so I want to talk about how Gateway is able to do this. These are, I guess, the outputs, the initiatives and the programs, but I don't really want to talk about outputs. I want to talk about how Gateway is able to do all of this across time and how that makes them a place-based organization. So again, talking about that first category, I mentioned the first category that I talked about was, again, these existing practices, real practices that people are doing, existing capacities. These are the things that Gateway, these are the already existing things that Gateway is drawing from in order to produce something new. And so I'll start just by directing your attention to the middle of the slide. Gateway began with a scientific director who would be responsible for organizing various research projects. Over time, Gateway moved to their research chair model. And so you can see here that instead of having a single scientific director, Gateway now has this sort of multi-pronged approach where they have all kinds of different rural research chairs that can bring their expertise to different projects and different community programs. And so you can see right now that Gateway has, I think, 15 rural chairs of rural research. And I've extended the timeline a bit here past the current date, just to make a little bit more room for the text. But you can see here that Gateway currently has 15 pairs of rural research. At the top of the slide, you can see a visual of the partnerships that Gateway has with their university partners. So as you know, universities are doing a lot of research. They've got a lot of overhead that's in place to facilitate research processes. And so by partnering with these university partners, Gateway is really able to facilitate their research arm, really able to bring in additional resources that help along their research arms, because a lot of the research chairs that you see in the middle, some of them are associated with these various universities. So we've got the University of Guelph, who is partnered with Gateway, University of Waterloo, the School of Pharmacy, Western University, and Virgin College has partnered with Gateway at what point as well. So really, these university partners are really bringing a lot to the table in terms of research capability. Because again, Gateway is a kind of research apparatus. And so I'm trying to show you in this slide the different pieces that come together to create that enduring apparatus, research apparatus. Towards the bottom of the slide, you can see Gateway's health partners and their clinical site partners. So again, a lot of rural research, it takes place in the context of care. So sometimes researchers, whether they're students or research chairs, they need access to sites where care is taking place, or perhaps where there's certain kinds of equipment, certain kinds of interventions. Gateway research needs access to these sites, and so by partnering with their community partners, Gateway is able to gain access to these sites, and that's facilitative of their various research projects as well. I don't know if this is the best way to show it. I think that it would just be better to show you the map. So again, over here, we've got different locations where Gateway projects, essentially this map is showing those sites that have been facilitative of Gateway projects. So at least one project. Some of these locations more than others have been more heavily involved in terms of facilitating Gateway research. But again, these sites are where at least one project has taken place, or these sites have been facilitated of at least one project. And you can also see the university partners here. But what's not pictured are the various pharmacies. There are a lot of pharmacies that have been facilitated with Gateway research that aren't pictured here. But this gives you a good indication of those sites that are facilitated. So again, Gateway, their research arm is a kind of research apparatus that is active in the community, and so you can see the sites here that are facilitated. So again, we're still talking about that first category, the existing capacities, the practices, the sort of ingredients that Gateway can pull into their own endeavor. And so this is showing those ingredients, or at least three major components, three major ingredients. The next slide is another major ingredient. So these would be the Gateway students. So Gateway students are coming into contact with Gateway, and they are helping with individual research projects. They might be their own projects. For example, graduate students have their own ideas about what they want to research, and so they're coming with their own ideas, and sometimes Gateway can be facilitated with that. Other times there are these larger scale research projects that Gateway has, and students are able to sort of jump in and either join a project as it's currently going on, or maybe a project has been tabled for a while, and then a new student can help or bring it back to life. And so this slide captures Gateway's students across time. I don't have it quite organized right now, but essentially there are students come into contact with Gateway in a variety of different ways. I'd say there's about 3 different ways. The first would be, you saw earlier Gateway's university partners. So a lot of students they come to be part of the Gateway team because they are the students of the Gateway research chairs, for example. So the Gateway research chairs are exposing these students to an opportunity that might be at Gateway. Another way that students come into contact with Gateway is as summer students. So these students come from all over the province, sometimes all over the country. They might be they likely go to a school that is not necessarily a Gateway University partner. And then, of course, there's other ways that students come into contact with Gateway. There are co-op high school students, there are nursing students who are doing practicum elements. And perhaps in the future I could organize this slide a bit better to show you, to distinguish between the different streams. But really this slide is really meant to show you how Gateway is actively drawing from the capacities and the interests of students who are looking to be part of rural healthcare as a way to do what Gateway is doing across time. Okay, so that sort of covers that first category that I wanted to talk about, those existing practices, those existing capacities that Gateway can draw from as ingredients to do what they want to do. And so what about that second category of ideas and concepts? So again, I'll just direct your attention to this table here that shows the different research chair appointments that Gateway has. And you can see just by looking at the names, the sort of the interdisciplinary weight that Gateway's research chair roster carries. And you'll notice also that in the beginning stages of the sort of research chair model, again, the areas of expertise were more oriented towards or surrounding, what we would consider medical or clinical areas. So let's say pharmacy, medicine, preventative medicine, for example. But then over time, the Gateway research chairs, in terms of the scope that the whole roster is covering, is really moving towards, let's say, the social sciences, the social determinants of health. So now we have rural research chairs that are sort of moving beyond that clinical and that medical focus. So we have the rural chair of economic development, change in development, resiliency, for example. So we really have this it was always interdisciplinary, but now it's even more interdisciplinary in terms of moving beyond those traditional medical fields and moving into the social determinants of health. So just looking at this chart, you can really see the interdisciplinary weight that the research chairs are bringing to the Gateway endeavor. And so for any project or program that's emerging, Gateway can draw from all of these different areas of expertise. And I shouldn't discount the board either. The board has their own areas of expertise as well. But again, because I'm looking at the research arm, I'm talking mostly about the research chairs. So again, just to talk a bit more about the second category of ideas, discourses, and concepts. Really here we're talking about abstract ideas about how projects should come together, or about how Gateway should design their services or design their research projects. So there's this idea of evidence-based medicine. So let's say policymakers or public health wants to make use of evidence-based medicine. Perhaps Gateway should be contributing to that. So there's this idea of whatever Gateway can do, perhaps it should contribute to this notion of evidence-based medicine, place-based medicine. Again, this abstract idea that what Gateway does when they're doing research, it should be community-based. So they should be bringing elements of the community together to make these projects happen. And even the health topics themselves, there's this idea that, well, the focus of research should pertain or should have value, or it should be important to the target counties, so Huron County, Perth, Grey, and Bruce. Related to the last slide, again, this idea that projects should have a kind of interdisciplinarity to them, should bring together multiple disciplines. And this idea that there's opportunities for research and service programming. So Gateway has their community programming, they also have their research projects, but then sometimes the lines are blurred. So sometimes when Gateway is doing a community program, there's opportunity for research to take place there as well. So there's sort of that dual component. And then again, just drawing from Gateway's mission and vision, this idea that what they're doing should always aim at improving health and quality of life of its rural residents. So this is, improving the life and quality of rural residents for, rural people in general, but also just for their own rural target population. And so these are just abstract ideas that Gateway is bringing into each of their projects. And so again, thinking about the second category of ideas, these are some of the ideas that Gateway is bringing into what it does. Okay, and so this third category, subjective experience, really here we're talking about goals, subjective aims, decisions, meanings. So essentially we're talking about the passions of the research chairs, the students and the board members. we talked about, the research chairs and their different disciplines and how they can bring in a disciplinary weight to the Gateway endeavor, but they also have their own specific passions and the meanings that research chairs are attaching to their rural research. We're also, for this category, talking about subjective aims. So the intended aim of a specific project. So if students and Gateway research chairs are, let's say, developing a tool that can have some use for healthcare workers in the region, again, there's this value that the research project is supposed to have when it's complete. It's not just going to sit on a shelf somewhere, but students and chairs, they're trying to build programs and do research that can have a value beyond for others in the county. So we're talking about the aims in terms of subjective experience of students and chairs, the aims that drive what this value is going to be for the community. We're also talking about the direct experiences of participants and patients. So participants of rural programming, community programming, what it means for them, sometimes what it means for patients in the context of research. So really for this category, we're talking about how the abstract ideas from the last category, how these become real in specific situations, specific new practices, new community programming, new community research, and the decisions about how all these ingredients are coming together. So again, those three categories are really what interests me in terms of Gateway being a place building organization. And so I've tried to, in the last little bit, explain to you what I mean by these three categories and how they all come together. And so just a little bit of a discussion here. Gateway, essentially in my view, what Gateway is doing is in building their projects and building their research projects and their community programming, they are apprehending the already existing capacities that exist, the practices that exist. So again, looking at the research chairs, the students, as well as healthcare elements that are already embedded in their locality and in their environment. So including these physical sites, these clinical sites where research can take place, et cetera. So in building up a new project or a new program, Gateway really, through their network, knows about these different ingredients and knows that they're available to bring into new projects. But then Gateway is also apprehending ideas about how to bring it all together. So again, going back to the second category in terms of ideas and concepts, these abstract ideas like, research should be place-based or research should be region-specific. So Gateway is at once thinking about all of these ingredients and then also thinking about how to bring them all together. And then finally, in terms of Gateway research projects and community programming, Gateway is finally making a decision about how to bring all these elements together to form a new research project or to form a new community programming. So at this point, a project becomes this or that project with a specific kind of form. So it's no longer an idea. Gateway personnel, students, research chairs, they're moving all of these ingredients so that it finally becomes something new. So that's how I have been thinking about Gateway projects. But really, the important part is that Gateway doesn't just do this once. It would be interesting to look at one project or one level of community programming to see how they build that, even just one time. But the thing is, Gateway is doing this over and over again. It's iterative. And so Gateway is doing this over and over again, drawing from all of these ingredients, thinking about how to bring these ingredients together, and then making a decision about how to bring them together. And this is happening across time. And so what's essentially happening is there's a momentum building up. And so when Gateway wants to do these projects, do future projects, build future programming, they have this sort of foundation to build on. And so I would say Gateway as a placemaking organization is really building from this foundation that they built for themselves. They're drawing from their own level of activity. So essentially I guess you could say my thesis is Gateway is in placing. So in placing, it means settling in place. Gateway is in placing a rural healthcare research portal that endures through time. So Gateway has all of these projects, and Gateway, as a portal, doesn't actually endure through time, but it is able to endure because it's always revisiting this idea of building up this healthcare portal. And the moment Gateway stops doing that would be when the gateway or the portal ceases to exist. But as long as Gateway is always revisiting these things, in which they've been doing for many years now, they're able to continue their activity through time. And so I see Gateway as a placemaking organization that sort of endures across time. So I think that concludes my actual talk. There's some references there if you're interested, if you'd like to follow up. But I think now we'll move to the panel discussion. So I can stop sharing my slides here. And so I'll just move right into introducing the different panelists, and maybe someone can make sure that the panelists are appearing on the screen. Jay's giving me the nod there. And so, okay, so what I'm going to do is continue with the panel discussion. And if there are any questions coming in from the online chat, if anyone watching wants to ask a question to either me or any of the panelists, feel free to chime in, and then Nancy or Dan will relay your questions to us. So I'm just going to introduce the panel here. I'll start by introducing Jay. So hello, Jay. So Jay is on the board of directors at Gateway. He's also a chair of rural research at Gateway. He's the chair of rural nutrition and exercise. And he is involved in a number of Gateway research projects across time, community programming as well. And he also has some volunteer commitments with Huron Hospice, so an organization that has recently opened up a new residential hospice in the region. And so Jay is heavily involved with his commitments with Gateway and with Huron Hospice. He's heavily involved with local healthcare concerns. And so by extension, I would say healthcare and place building, let's say. So welcome, Jay. I'm going to start off by asking you an initial question here. So with Gateway, there's a good mix of newer board members and those who have been with Gateway for a while. And there's also the new research chairs. So there's essentially an ever-changing roster, let's say, of research chairs, and Gateway is always receptive to having new research chairs. And the same thing can be said about the opportunities that students are getting. So students are looking to gain meaningful experience or to pursue or follow a particular research interest. And so students are always coming and going. So, you know, across board members, research chairs, and students, there's all kinds of opportunities to jump in. So my question for you is, do you think this is a part of Gateway's success? And by success here, I mean Gateway's ability to continue launching itself forward. And so in terms of Gateway's scope and the diversity of its activities, it seems to me that there's all kinds of places for people to jump in and to be a part of it, or at least that's the sense that I'm getting from Gateway. Does that sound accurate at all to you?
Yeah, so yeah, Scott, that sounds pretty accurate. I think that it's a combination of new people, new students who come in every summer. We employ summer students on research projects, and having that injection of young enthusiasm and energy and passion for a health research project, it really helps propel all the work that Gateway does through the year. But there is a few other people that you mentioned them in the beginning here, and it's that those key consistent people that have kept driving Gateway all along. Gwen Devereaux is a force to be reckoned with, and it's too bad she couldn't be here today on the panel, because you know she really has been that consistent force that helps propel the organization forward. And having a few of those key people in your organization that are consistent and can see the project through, that I think has been a major reason why Gateway is still here today. But it's that injection of new energy all the time with new contacts, new collaborations that have also helped propel Gateway. So does that answer the question?
Yes, I think so. Yeah. And we can return to that idea as well, actually, after when I come back to you. So now I'm going to ask Peter Smith a question. So Peter is the creative director of the CCRC, or the Canadian Centre for Rural Creativity. And the CCRC was initially part of the Blythe 1419 project. And then once this larger umbrella project came to its conclusion, the CCRC lives on. And so the CCRC is now its own entity, and it's been around since 2014. And the biggest thing, the most visible aspect of the CCRC, it's the R2R conferences, the Rural Talks to Rural conferences. So this is a biennial conference that has taken place in 2016, 18, 20 and 22. And so I've known Peter for a few years, and I'm sure he has some good insights in regards to organizational development and placemaking. And Peter, when we met, your organization was probably only 2 years old, 2 or 3, I suppose. And I think next year you'll be approaching the 10th birthday. So that is quite the accomplishment as well. But Peter, the first question I have for you has to do with the Blythe 1419 project. So the CCRC in its inception, along with the 1419 project, was strongly entangled with the restoration of the Playhouse in Blythe, if I understand that correctly. So are you able to tell us a little bit about that story at all? And then I have a little follow-up question for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to be here. Nice to see Paul and Jay. And I agree about Gwen Devereaux. She is a force. Gets people to do things, whether they want to or not. And more often than not, they want to. Remarkable. So thanks, Scott. And I really enjoyed your presentation too. I think you got to take that on the road. I think more people have to know about Gateway across this country of ours. I just think it's such a great model for rural communities. And I think it's also something that needs to be applied elsewhere. I think in all that Jay said about bringing in new blood, the research that's going on, and also connecting to local knowledge within those rural communities. It's really impressive. It really is. I'm a huge fan of Gateway. I know everybody on this call is as well. Anyway, to the question, yeah, we started with a leaky roof. I mean, this is, I tell people wherever I go, if you got a leaky roof somewhere in your town, you're at the beginning of an incredible journey. But you need to have a leaky roof to start. So I was artistic director of the Blythe Festival at the time, and somebody said, the roof is leaking. And I said, okay, what do we have to do? Well, we have to put a new roof on. Okay. And how much is that? $300,000, they said. And I said, okay, so we'll ask some people for some money and we'll put the new roof on. Well, then we should do probably something about the seats, and then maybe the hall itself. And then maybe we should improve the kitchen. What about the basement? And, the art gallery and the stairs, we'd like to. It became this movement that had nothing to do with me. It had to do with not only the hall, but every week, 40, 50 people would show up at the in the offices of the Blythe Festival, farmers and students and business people and kids and dogs and birds. I don't know what all, but they just show up. And they had all of these ideas. They had all these things they wanted to do because they saw that fixing the leaky roof could be the beginning of a project, the beginning of a revitalization, a regeneration. So when we started, it was chaos. It's still a little bit chaotic, but we're maybe more comfortable in the chaos now than we were. And it was really the voice of the community that really got that hall revitalized. And then from that, we had 3 pillars. One was the revitalization of Memorial Hall. The second was the Canadian Centre for Rural Creativity, and also developing something called the Rural Trust, which we have not done yet. And that was to have funds available for local community to initiate their own projects. So it's listening to the various voices that are out there. It's participating in it, working alongside, as opposed to it being a hierarchical movement. And I would suggest listening to you talk about Gateway and what I know about Gateway, it has allowed itself to evolve, to adapt. And it is in a really exciting place, but it wasn't always thus. It was tricky. It's difficult when you start these things. And I loved in your talk about organization as a verb. I remember Leroy Littlebear at Artoir 20 talking about, we speak in verbs, you talk in nouns. You need to name something in order to understand it. We have everything that's fluid. So I think that's just a beautiful thing that you said. And also, there's just one other thing I'd like to say about your talk, Scott, around the word repetition. In theater, it's called rehearsal. Rehearsal is a constant tilling of the ground until you reach production. And you continually go back to rehearse and to till that ground, which is a good agricultural term, in order to present the story to the audience. But it's an ongoing process. It's not something that's fixed, even though the structure of it, showing up at 10 a.m. and working till 6, having a break at 10 and having a break at 2 o'clock, it is this constant tilling that really is the life of any project, any organization, that is a verb.
Okay, thank you, Pete. Okay, so my next question is for Paul. Well, I did have a follow-up for you, Pete, but I'll get to that after. So our next panelist is Paul Nichol. So Paul is the General Manager of Community Futures Huron in Brussels. And Brussels is actually where the last R2R conference was. So Community Futures is a federal program. It provides small business services to people living in rural and remote communities. So among other things, Community Futures provides small business loans, tools, training, and events for people who are wanting to build up their enterprises. So Paul, I wanted to ask you about placemaking and place-based development. We've talked in the past about Community Futures. It doesn't have an explicit mandate for placemaking or place-based development, at least in its language that it uses or in those terms. But in your view, to what degree do you see your role as being facilitative of place building? Do you see it as intersecting at all with place-based development? And if so, how?
Yeah, I would argue the opposite, Scott, that it's explicitly been mandated, and it ebbs and flows from time to time. But if you look at our three main lines of service, we provide business advice to entrepreneurs. We do small commercial loans, and the third one is actually community development, and that's based on an understanding that for businesses to thrive, they need to be within thriving communities as well. So it's always been there. I would argue too that it depends on place as well. So we function in a regional economy, which happens to have the boundaries of Huron County. So, that place has its own, pulls, tugs, opportunities, and threats. But I think back to the question of gateway, and I like to use a term called civic entrepreneurship. What does any entrepreneur do? They look at a market gap and turn that into an opportunity. And so Gateway takes a look at a gap in terms of the health of the population and says, there's a vacuum here. There's an opportunity to move in and sort of exploit that opportunity in a very positive manner. So placemaking has Gateway Place, you bet. The concept behind Gateway is to make Midwestern Ontario, Grey, Bruce, Huron, Perth, the place in Canada to undertake research on rural healthcare issues. And to me, that ties up entrepreneurship, community development, and placemaking better than any example I can think of.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Jay, I've got another question for you. So I wanted to talk to you about this idea. Gateway's found a way for their projects to have sort of a mind of their own. So if there's a continuity of support for the project, or whether that's through funding or just within the organization, or if it gets a good response, the program gets a kind of momentum or repeatability. And then Gateway gets, I guess, they get to play a little bit with the idea of what it can serve and what it can do, and they get to modify it a bit. So you get the opportunity to do that when it occurs multiple times. So I want to talk to you about the Grand Sparks program, because I know that's had multiple iterations. Do you get this feeling, and this goes back again to this notion of repeatability or maybe rehearsal that Pete was talking about. Do you get this feeling sort of in its fourth iteration that there's a sort of foundational history that you can draw from, a history of the program that you're able to draw from? Are you able to talk about that automated aspect at all? I imagine the fourth iteration of Grand Sparks is different from those first two or three.
Yeah, so the Grand Sparks program, for anyone unfamiliar, it's a summer camp that I developed for grandparents and their grandkids to come out to experience all the traditional summer activities and some untraditional ones too. And the idea of getting the seniors more active was the whole motivation behind it. But so the Grand Sparks program, like a lot of other programs at Gateway, it was very much a function of place, Scott. Like exactly what you were talking about. It was Gateway is a place where I, as a research chair, had a serendipitous meeting with Chris Lee, who at the time was running the Walton Raceway and Edge of Walton Racetrack, and there was another researcher there, Rosemarie Dolinar, who's very, very interested in lung health. And we just got talking about the challenges that our community was facing. And I see as a question here from Bob Murray in the chat, someone with a lot of unique health conditions, and asking, where do I fit in your organization? Well, Gateway is this place where we listen to grassroots community concerns about health issues, and we have these brilliant minds that we can network with to solve these problems, and then we go look for funding. And that's sort of been the traditional way that we operate things. And then once a program gets established, like Grand Sparks, it's often self-funding. So we find a way to keep the program going. But it's having the Gateway as a place where grassroots research can happen that directly addresses the community's needs. It's a really unique place.
Okay, thank you, Jay. My next question is for Pete. So Pete, I want to talk to you a little bit about the R2R conferences. So this relates to my last question that I asked Jay. So I want to talk to you about this idea that the CCRC is engaged in a kind of placemaking across time, where I want you to consider that idea. So R2R is a biennial conference and with 4 iterations under its belt. Now, of course, planning a conference can never be easy. I can't imagine it's easy at all. But do you recently feel with R2R 2022, the most recent conference, that like with Grand Sparks, like what Jay was talking about, there's a sort of foundation to build on? I'm not trying to lead the witness here, but do you find that there's a sort of autopilot that takes place when you get into a pattern? The idea of R2R 2024, the next conference, this idea, it seems so doable, it seems so natural after the previous 4. And so there's that sort of reiteration. Do you have any comments on that thought?
Yeah, yes, I do. And Paul is here. And so I just, again, every time I give a shout out to Paul Nichol and his support for R2R 22, which was in the Four Winds Barn in Brussels, which is an unbelievable facility. While we're plugging things here, it was great. We'd never done that before. We were always doing it in Memorial Hall, but this time around it wasn't available, so we moved over to the barn. And it was it changed things somewhat. It was working with a new community. There was a lot of input from the local community. So as far as iterations or autopilot, I would say walking into darkness with a flashlight might be a better way of describing what we're doing here. If we knew where we were going, we probably wouldn't go there. We are going someplace that, yes, housing was involved and well-being was involved, climate was involved, community. We looked at the future. We brought in a futurist. All of this happened fairly organically. Certainly Paul could talk about this as much as I can because he was present for all of it. And supportive, as was Community Futures, as was Gateway. I mean, with everybody on this call. I mean, I think, were you there, Scott? I mean, I think everybody here, maybe even the audience, was at R2R. And I think, for me, the excitement is not knowing, in a way, and then trying to figure out a path. So make the path while you walk it kind of idea. Each one is unique. Each one is different. I mean, we did a 2-week one in 2020, which drove everybody into the ground. I mean, for 2 weeks, we ran things. So we try different things. And I don't think there's ever been an autopilot. I think it really is more of a wonderment at what we're doing, where we are at as a people, as communities, as individuals. And I think trying to bring people together that mightn't ever come together and put them into a conversation. Rural talks to rural. And I'll bring up one example, maybe, and then I'll stop because I know we don't have a lot of time. But I do have a John Prine story, which I wish I could tell, but we just don't have time. Beretta Casey came up from Kentucky for R2R 22 in Brussels, and she spoke. I wanted Gwen to talk to her about how Gateway came into being, about the carload that went down to Kentucky. They found out about what Beretta had been doing. They brought the idea back. They tried to emulate that. Then they realized they wanted to do something different, and it diverged. But the notion of sharing a good idea, adapting it to your own community, doesn't mean you emulate it to the letter. It doesn't mean you fall into an autopilot and go, you did this, then did this, then did this. That you start to discover what you need to do in your community, and you listen to the community, which Gateway has done. To me, it is the best example of sharing an idea and then adapting it to your own community. And I think if Artois does anything ever, it is that exact story that I just told you, an idea from someplace else that's adapted in another community and it flourishes. And having those two together on the stage was a very powerful moment for me. And I think for many people, seeing those two women who basically focused their life on community and in health. So, okay, I'll stop talking because I know we got to get Paul another question here. And the John Prine story is a good one. So we just.
Okay. Thanks, Pete. Now, Dan.
Scott, I wanted to
sure
bring up a comment here that's in the chat box or the Q&A asked by a lady from Kapuskasing, I believe, thinking about scale and place. Many communities outside of Southwest Ontario could benefit from Gateway's approach or work. How do you think broadening this geography might impact the placemaking dimensions of Gateway's work? And I don't know if you can answer that in 30 seconds or less, but I think that Pete has probably answered it in his discussion of sort of evolving projects, but being shaped by their place and their time and the environment that they're in. Well, anyway, Scott, I'll throw it to you quickly. And
sure. Well, I'd say with a Gateway, I mean, not every place is lucky to be in such close proximity to the university. So, I mean, Gateway is about a couple hours away from University of Guelph, which would be, I guess, their furthest university partner. But I mean, 2 hours is doable in terms of travel. And so I'm not sure. I mean, it really helps that they have all of these, that Gateway has all of these ingredients that are within proximity. So I think the model could work elsewhere, but again, it's a matter of adapting it to a particular geography. And, there are some rural places that might not have those same university, resources in the immediate area, but there are other ways to communicate and to collaborate. And so I don't want to say that distance is necessarily an issue, but so I hope that answers it, Dan. And I know we're approaching the end here. Do we have any more time for another question for Paul, or have we reached the end here?
I think we're pretty respectful of people's time. And
okay, that's fine.
And this is the frustration with every one of these 1 hour lunch and learn events. There's more material, more knowledge, and more experience to share than we ever have time for. But I think that then allows us to say, come on back and continue the discussion. And so right, okay. I'm stepping in as moderator. Nancy Simpson had to step away. So I'm going to wrap up proceedings for this afternoon. My name is Dan Stringer. I'm the chair of the board of Gateway. And I want to thank you, Scott, for enlightening us on this whole concept of placemaking and how it relates to Gateway's contributions and endurance, and for attempting to encapsulate almost 15 years of activity, people, and Gateway's unique approach. We keep getting asked, what is Gateway's elevator pitch? When I looked at your slides, I thought, you can't have one. You can't put that in 30 seconds, and I'm kind of proud of that. The other thing I wanted to mention was your statement about emplacing a rural healthcare research portal that endures through time. And I guess if there was anything that could be the umbrella for Gateway, that would be it. So thank you for those very, very good words. So overall, thank you, Scott, Peter, Jay, and Paul, for all your insight and for creating and contributing to a conversation that highlights our unique organization and the rural communities we serve in Huron, Perth, Bruce, and Grey counties. And we also have to thank our sponsors at this time for their continued support. Without them, this lecture series would not be possible. And they include CIBC Private Wealth Management, DeJager Town Square IDA Pharmacy in Goderich, Zehrs in Goderich, the Town of Goderich, Libro Credit Union, MacEwan and Feagan Insurance Brokers in Goderich, and McGee Motors in Goderich, and Huron for broadcasting our proceedings. Gateway Center of Excellence in Rural Health is a not-for-profit organization with charitable status. We greatly appreciate and welcome all support that we receive. If you would like to donate to Gateway in support of this lecture series or other activities that Gateway undertakes, visit the Gateway website and click on the donate button. To learn more about Gateway's rural health research projects and other programs or activities, or to view the missed lecture series sessions, browse our website at gatewayruralhealth.ca. We also sell high quality Gateway branded merchandise and clothing as one of our fundraising endeavors. So while you're on the website, you could check out our online store also. So thanks everybody for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at the next lecture on April 4th at 12 noon, when Gateway Research Chair of Rural Health Coaching, Sheila Schulheim, and Program Coordinator of Lonely No More and Connectedness Coaching, co-developer Sarah Versteeg, will highlight 2 successful and locally conducted examples of transforming research into community-based action. Their presentation is entitled Enhancing the Resilience of Our Rural Communities, Moving Knowledge into Practice. We hope you'll pass the lecture series information along to your network, as our goal is to expand the reach of this lecture series with the aim of promoting the knowledge economy, reducing social isolation, and supporting Gateway's mission of improving the health and quality of life of rural residents. So we'll see everybody next month. Stay well and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, everyone.
Good. Thank you. Bye-bye.